In the 1960s, American grandmothers made 30 Sunday desserts after church that seemed impossible to forget. Millions of families grew up eating them. They appeared week after week on dining room tables across America. Then something unexpected happened. The women who knew the recipes passed away. The traditions faded and the desserts vanished. Today, some of these once famous treats are almost completely forgotten. These are 30 forgotten Sunday desserts from the 1960s no one bakes anymore. Sunday afternoons in 1962 smelled like cinnamon and buttered breadcrumbs baking in cast-iron skillets. Grandmothers peeled tart Granny Smith apples, sliced them thin, and layered them with torn white bread soaked in melted butter, brown sugar, and cinnamon. The dessert baked at 375 degrees for 45 minutes until the top turned golden and crispy, while the apples softened into tender, spiced filling beneath. Some families added lemon zest or a splash of vanilla. Others sprinkled nutmeg or used day-old biscuits instead of bread. The dessert came to the table still bubbling, served warm in bowls with heavy cream poured over the top. It was simpler than pie, no crust to roll. No fancy technique required, just honest ingredients transformed by heat. Children fought over the crispy top layer, while adults savored the soft apple center. The recipe lived in grandmothers' heads, never written down, passed along through watching and tasting. By the 1990s, frozen apple crisps replaced the homemade version, and Apple Brown Betty disappeared from Sunday tables, taking its buttered bread soul with it. Every Sunday morning, grandmothers saved leftover breakfast bread, the heels of white loaves, day-old biscuits, stale rolls, and by afternoon that bread became dessert. They tore it into chunks, soaked it in a custard of eggs, whole milk, sugar, vanilla, and freshly grated nutmeg. Then baked it in buttered casserole dishes until golden. The tops puffed and crisped, while the centers stayed soft and custardy, perfumed with nutmeg's warm, slightly sweet spice. Some grandmothers added raisins or a handful of chopped pecans. Others drizzled warm vanilla sauce or caramel over each serving. The dessert was economical, turning yesterday's leftovers into something special, and it filled the house with a scent that made children restless during Sunday dinner, waiting for dessert. Bread pudding appeared on church potluck tables, at family reunions, and after every Sunday roast. The recipe required no precision, just feel, intuition, and the knowledge that came from making it every week for decades. By the early 2000s, bread pudding vanished from home kitchens, replaced by boxed brownie mixes and store-bought cheesecakes. The nutmeg tin sat unused, and the recipe disappeared. In Midwest church basements throughout the 1960s, Swedish cream appeared on dessert tables in cut glass bowls, its pale ivory color topped with bright red strawberries or raspberries. The dessert was deceptively simple: heavy cream, sugar, gelatin, sour cream, vanilla, and almond extract, but its flavor was unforgettable. Grandmothers dissolved unflavored gelatin in cold water, then stirred it into warm sweetened cream until smooth. After cooling slightly, they folded in sour cream and almond extract, creating a dessert that was creamy, tangy, and delicately perfumed. The mixture set in the refrigerator for hours, then was spooned into individual serving dishes and topped with fresh berries. The contrast between the cool, silky creme and the tart fruit made every bite perfect. Swedish creme wasn't flashy. It didn't tower or sparkle, but it was elegant in its restraint. Church ladies made it for special Sundays, anniversary dinners, and bridal showers. The recipe traveled through Scandinavian American communities, handwritten on index cards and shared between friends. By the 1990s, the dessert faded from memory, replaced by tiramisu and panna cotta. The almond extract bottle dried up, and Swedish creme was forgotten. Apple pandowdy looked like a pie that had been in a fight and lost, but that broken, rustic appearance was exactly the point. Grandmothers filled deep baking dishes with sliced apples, usually tart varieties like Granny Smith or winesap, tossed with brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and molasses. They covered the fruit with a simple pie crust, then baked it until the crust turned golden. Halfway through baking, they pulled the dish from the oven, broke the crust into pieces with a spoon, and pressed the broken bits down into the bubbling fruit, a technique called dowdying. The crust soaked up the spiced apple juices, becoming soft and caramelized while the edges stayed crisp. After baking, the dessert came to the table looking humble and homely, But one bite revealed its genius. Every spoonful contained tender apples, sweet molasses syrup, and bits of pastry both crispy and soft. Families served it warm with heavy cream or vanilla ice cream. The dessert was forgiving, requiring no perfection, no crimped edges, no decorative touches. By the late 1980s, apple pandowdy disappeared, replaced by polished lattice-top pies. The dowdying technique was forgotten, and the dessert vanished. Many of you have been asking where to find these recipes. We've gathered hundreds of them from the Depression era through the 1970s in our cookbook, Grandma's Kitchen. Complete instructions, pro tips in 10 chapters. Link is in the description below. Now, let's get back to the video. Sundae dessert tables in the 1960s shimmered with cherry gelatin supreme, a molded dessert that combined cherry jello, crushed pineapple, cream cheese, and whipped cream in layers of red and white. Grandmothers dissolved 2 packages of cherry gelatin in boiling water, stirred in crushed pineapple with its juice, then poured half the mixture into a mold and refrigerated it until firm. While the first layer set, they whipped cream cheese with sugar and vanilla until fluffy, then folded in whipped cream. Once the gelatin layer was solid, they spread the cream cheese mixture on top, then poured the remaining cherry gelatin over everything and chilled it until set. The finished dessert was unmolded onto a serving plate, revealing glossy red layers separated by a snowy white cream center. It was sweet, tangy, creamy, and fruity all at once. The dessert appeared at church potlucks, Easter dinners, and Sunday lunches throughout the decade. Children loved the bright colors and jiggly texture. By the 1980s, Jell-O molds fell out of fashion, dismissed as old-fashioned and kitschy. The gelatin molds were donated to thrift stores, and cherry gelatin supreme was never made again. 5 Sunday desserts disappeared without ceremony. Grandmothers stopped baking, daughters never learned, and the recipes were tossed during estate cleanouts. No photographs were taken, no instructions were written down, and the teaching ended. The desserts vanished completely, taking their flavors, textures, and traditions into silence. Summer Sundaes in the 1960s ended with lemon icebox pie, a no-bake dessert so cold and tangy it made children's faces pucker. Grandmothers mixed sweetened condensed milk with fresh lemon juice and lemon zest, watching as the acid curdled the milk into a thick, creamy filling. They poured the mixture into graham cracker crusts, crushed graham crackers mixed with melted butter and sugar, pressed into pie pans, and refrigerated the pies for hours until firm. The filling set without baking, making the dessert perfect for hot weather when turning on the oven felt unbearable. Some grandmothers topped the pies with whipped cream or meringue browned under the broiler. Others left them plain, letting the bright lemon flavor speak for itself. The dessert tasted like sunshine and simplicity, requiring only 5 ingredients and a refrigerator. Families served it after Sunday pot roast, slicing it into wedges that held their shape perfectly. The contrast between the sweet crust and tart filling made every bite refreshing. By the 1990s, frozen key lime pies replaced the homemade version, and lemon icebox pie faded from memory. The fresh lemons went unbought, and the recipe was lost. Late summer Sundaes brought fresh plum crumb dessert, a simple fruit dessert that celebrated the brief plum season. Grandmothers halved and pitted purple plums, Italian prunes, damson plums, or Santa Rosa varieties, and arranged them cut side up in buttered baking dishes. They sprinkled the fruit with sugar and a touch of cinnamon, then topped everything with a thick crumb mixture made from flour, brown sugar, butter, and oats. The dessert baked at 375 degrees until the plums softened and released their juices, which bubbled up through the golden, crispy topping. The smell filled the house with the scent of caramelized fruit and toasted oats. Families ate it warm, spooning the tender plums and crunchy topping into bowls, and adding vanilla ice cream that melted into purple rivers. The dessert was forgiving, no fancy techniques, no perfect measurements, just fruit and crumbs transformed by heat. Some grandmothers added almond extract to the topping or mixed in chopped walnuts. By September, plum season ended, and the dessert disappeared until next year. By the 1990s, the dessert stopped appearing altogether. Plum trees were cut down, and fresh plum crumb dessert was forgotten. Spring Sundaes in the 1960s brought rhubarb fool with strawberries, a British dessert that found its way into American church cookbooks. Grandmothers chopped fresh rhubarb stalks into chunks, cooked them with sugar until they broke down into a thick pink compote, then let the mixture cool completely. Once cold, they folded the sweetened rhubarb into freshly whipped cream, creating swirls of pink and white. Some added diced strawberries for extra sweetness and color. The dessert was light, tangy, creamy, and refreshing, with the tartness of rhubarb balanced by sugar and cream. Families spooned it into glass dishes or stemmed glasses, showing off the pretty pink swirls. The name foule came from the French word fouler, meaning to crush or press, referring to the mashed fruit. The dessert required no baking, no gelatin, no complicated steps, just fruit, sugar, and cream. It appeared on Mother's Day tables, spring potlucks, and Sunday dinners when rhubarb stalks turned red in backyard gardens. By the 1980s, rhubarb lost its popularity, dismissed as too sour and old-fashioned. The rhubarb patches were dug up, and rhubarb foule disappeared from dessert tables, leaving only a faint memory of its pink, creamy beauty. Sunday dinners in the 1960s often ended with English trifle, a towering dessert layered in glass bowls so everyone could see its beautiful construction. Grandmothers started with slices of pound cake or ladyfingers, arranged them in the bottom of a trifle bowl, then brushed them with sweet sherry or fruit juice. Next came a layer of strawberry or raspberry jam, spread thick. On top of that, they poured homemade custard, eggs, milk, sugar, and vanilla cooked slowly until thick and let it cool. Then came fresh fruit, sliced strawberries, raspberries or peaches, followed by another layer of cake, custard, and fruit. The final layer was always whipped cream, piped or spread smooth, sometimes decorated with toasted almonds or candied cherries. The dessert chilled in the refrigerator for hours, allowing the layers to meld together. When spooned into serving dishes, each portion revealed stripes of cream, fruit, custard, and cake. The combination of textures and flavors, creamy, fruity, sweet, boozy, made every bite complex and satisfying. English trifle appeared at Easter dinners, anniversary celebrations, and special Sundays. By the 1990s, the tradition faded. The trifle bowls were packed away, and the dessert was forgotten. Sunday tables in the 1960s often featured peach Bavarian, a shimmering gelatin mold that combined fresh peaches, lemon jello, and whipped cream. Grandmothers dissolved lemon or peach gelatin in boiling water, then stirred in cold water, and let it cool until syrupy. While the gelatin thickened, they peeled and diced fresh peaches, preferably Freestone varieties that slipped easily from their pits, and folded them into the half-set gelatin along with whipped cream. The mixture went into decorative molds, fluted bundt shapes, ring molds, or fancy copper designs, and chilled for hours until firm. When unmolded onto serving plates, the dessert stood tall and glossy, dotted with chunks of peach suspended in creamy, pale orange gelatin. It was light, fruity, and elegant, perfect for hot summer afternoons when heavier desserts felt too rich. Families served it with extra whipped cream or a drizzle of peach syrup. The dessert celebrated peach season, which lasted only a few weeks each summer. By the 1980s, gelatin molds fell out of favor, replaced by mousse cakes and cheesecakes. The copper molds were sold at yard sales, and peach Bavarian disappeared from Sunday tables forever. 10 Sunday desserts vanished in silence. Grandmothers passed away without teaching the recipes, molds were thrown out, and the next generation never learned. By 2000, these desserts existed only in fading memories. The kitchens grew quiet, the ovens stayed cold, and the traditions ended. Church potluck tables in the 1960s always featured pretzel gelatin dessert, a layered creation that confused first-timers. Was it a salad or a dessert? The answer was both. Grandmothers started with the bottom layer, crushing pretzels into coarse crumbs, mixing them with melted butter and sugar, then pressing the mixture into 9 by 13-inch pans and baking it at 350 degrees for 10 minutes until toasted and fragrant. Once cooled, they spread the second layer, cream cheese whipped with sugar, and folded into Cool Whip over the pretzel crust, sealing it edge to prevent the top layer from seeping through. The final layer was strawberry jello mixed with frozen strawberries, poured over the cream cheese layer, then chilled until firm. The finished dessert revealed 3 distinct layers when sliced: crunchy, salty pretzel base, creamy, tangy middle, and sweet fruity top. The combination of textures and flavors, salty and sweet, crunchy and smooth, cold and refreshing, made it unforgettable. Families debated whether to serve it as a side dish or dessert, but everyone agreed it was delicious. The recipe spread through church cookbooks, handwritten on index cards, and photocopied for friends. By the 1990s, the dessert's retro appeal faded, dismissed as too kitschy and artificial. The pretzel dessert combination seemed strange to younger generations raised on minimalist plating and natural ingredients. The recipe disappeared from potlucks, and pretzel gelatin dessert was forgotten. Sunday mornings in New England during the 1960s smelled like blueberry buckle baking in the oven, ready to serve warm after church. This wasn't a cobbler or a crisp, it was something in between. A tender butter cake studded with fresh blueberries and topped with a thick layer of cinnamon sugar crumb topping. Grandmother's cream butter and sugar, beaten eggs and vanilla, then folded in flour, baking powder, salt, and milk to create a thick batter. They gently stirred in 2 cups of fresh wild blueberries, tiny, intensely flavored berries picked from bushes behind the house, then spread the batter in buttered square pans. The topping came next, cold butter cut into flour, sugar, and cinnamon until the mixture resembled coarse crumbs, then scattered thickly over the batter. As the buckle baked, the cake rose around the berries, the topping crisped and browned, and the berries burst, releasing purple juice that stained the tender crumb. The cake buckled slightly in the center as it cooled, giving the dessert its name. Families ate it warm, sometimes with vanilla ice cream or whipped cream, sometimes plain. The combination of buttery cake, tart berries, and sweet crumb topping was perfect. By the 1980s, blueberry muffins replaced the buckle. The recipe faded from kitchen counters, and blueberry buckle disappeared, taking its buckled, berry-stained soul with it. Summer Sunday dinners in the 1960s often ended with cherry crisp, a fruit dessert simpler than pie but more special than canned fruit. Grandmothers pitted fresh sour cherries, Montmorency or early Richmond varieties, and tossed them with sugar and a tablespoon of cornstarch or tapioca to thicken the juices. The fruit went into buttered baking dishes, then got topped with a generous layer of oat crumble made from rolled oats, brown sugar, flour, butter, and cinnamon. Some grandmothers added chopped almonds or walnuts to the topping for extra crunch. The dessert baked at 375 degrees until the cherries bubbled up through the golden topping, filling the kitchen with the scent of caramelized fruit and toasted oats. Families served it warm in bowls with cold heavy cream poured over the top or vanilla ice cream that melted into the hot cherry juices. The contrast between tart cherries and sweet buttery topping made every bite balanced and satisfying. Cherry Crisp appeared only during cherry season, a brief window in June and July when fresh cherries were abundant and cheap. The dessert celebrated that fleeting season, turning simple fruit into something worth remembering. By the 1990s, cherry season came and went without ceremony. Fresh cherries stayed on grocery store shelves, and Cherry Crisp vanished from Sunday tables, forgotten along with the cherry pitting tools that once hung in every kitchen drawer. Special Sundays in the 1960s called for Bavarian apple tort, an elegant dessert that looked and tasted like something from a bakery, but was made entirely at home. Grandmothers started with a simple crust, butter, sugar, flour, and vanilla pressed into the bottom of springform pans. On top of the crust, they spread a layer of sweetened cream cheese filling, beaten until smooth and fluffy. Then came the apples, Granny Smith or Jonathan varieties, peeled, cored, and sliced thin, arranged in overlapping circles on top of the cream cheese. They sprinkled the apples with cinnamon sugar, scattered sliced almonds over everything, then baked the tort at 350 degrees until the apples softened and the edges turned golden. The finished dessert was beautiful, with caramelized apple slices glistening on top of creamy filling, all sitting on a buttery, cookie-like crust. The combination of textures, crisp crust, smooth cream cheese, tender apples, crunchy almonds, made every bite interesting. The tort was served at room temperature or slightly warm, cut into wedges like a pie. It appeared at anniversary dinners, bridal showers, and holidays. By the 1990s, the dessert disappeared, replaced by simpler apple pies and store-bought tarts. The springform pans were stored away, and Bavarian apple torte was forgotten, taking its beautiful apple-crowned elegance with it. Pie Sunday afternoons in the South during the 1960s ended with coconut custard pie, a simple dessert that required only eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, and shredded coconut. Grandmothers lined pie pans with homemade pastry crusts, then whisked together the custard filling, whole eggs beaten with sugar, evaporated milk, vanilla extract, and a pinch of salt. They stirred in sweetened shredded coconut, poured the mixture into unbaked pie shells, and slid the pies into 350-degree ovens. As the pies baked, the custard set into a smooth, creamy filling while the coconut floated to the top, forming a golden, toasted layer. The pies came out of the oven jiggly in the center, then firmed up as they cooled. The smell of toasted coconut and vanilla-scented custard filled the house. Families served the pie slightly warm or completely chilled, cutting clean slices that held their shape perfectly. The flavor was gentle and comforting, sweet but not cloying, coconutty but not overwhelming, creamy and smooth with a tender, flaky crust. Coconut custard pie appeared on Easter tables, Mother's Day brunches, and ordinary Sundays when grandmothers wanted something special but didn't have time for complicated desserts. By the 1990s, the pie disappeared, replaced by chocolate silk pies and key lime cheesecakes. The pie pan sat unused, and coconut custard pie was forgotten forever. 15 Sunday desserts disappeared completely. The recipes lived in grandmother's memories, never written down, never photographed, never preserved. When the grandmothers passed away in the 1990s, the desserts went with them. Daughters and granddaughters never asked for the recipes, and the teaching ended in silence. British-style sticky toffee pudding appeared on American Sunday tables in the 1960s, brought home by soldiers returning from England or copied from British cookbooks. The dessert was a moist, dark cake made with chopped dates soaked in boiling water and baking soda, which turned the dates soft and jammy. Grandmothers creamed butter and sugar, beat in eggs, then folded in the date mixture along with flour and vanilla. The batter went into square pans and baked until risen and springy. While the cake baked, they made the toffee sauce. Butter, brown sugar, and heavy cream cooked together until thick and glossy. When the cake came out of the oven, grandmothers poked holes all over the top with a skewer, then poured half the warm toffee sauce over the cake, letting it soak in. The rest of the sauce was served on the side. The finished dessert was intensely moist, deeply sweet, with the caramel flavor of dates and toffee in every bite. Families ate it warm, often with vanilla ice cream or whipped cream. The combination of spongy cake and sticky sauce was addictive. Sticky toffee pudding appeared at special Sunday dinners and holiday meals. By the 1990s, the dessert faded from American tables. Replaced by brownies and tiramisu, the date mixture stopped being made, and sticky toffee pudding was forgotten. Fancy Sunday dinners in the 1960s sometimes ended with lemon syllabub, a British dessert that required only cream, sugar, lemon, and white wine. Grandmothers combined fresh lemon juice and lemon zest with sugar and a splash of sweet white wine or sherry, stirring until the sugar dissolved. Then they poured in cold, heavy cream and whipped everything together until the mixture formed soft, billowy peaks. The acid from the lemon curdled the cream slightly, creating a light, mousse-like texture that was tangy, sweet, and boozy all at once. The syllabub was spooned into stemmed glasses or crystal dessert cups and chilled for an hour before serving. Some grandmothers garnished each serving with a twist of lemon peel or a sprinkle of nutmeg. The dessert was elegant and sophisticated, perfect for dinner parties and special occasions. It tasted bright and refreshing, with the lemon cutting through the richness of the cream. Syllabub had been popular in England since the 1700s, but it found a brief home in American kitchens during the mid-20th century when European cuisine was fashionable. By the 1980s, syllabub disappeared from American tables, replaced by cheesecake and mousse. The stemmed glasses were packed away, and lemon syllabub was forgotten, taking its lemony, boozy lightness into silence. Sundays in the 1960s called for chocolate mousse, a French dessert that seemed impossibly sophisticated but required only chocolate, eggs, sugar, and cream. Grandmothers melted dark chocolate, usually Baker's or Ghirardelli, over double boilers, stirring until smooth and glossy. They separated eggs, beat the yolks with sugar until pale and thick, then stirred the warm chocolate into the yolks. In another bowl, they whipped egg whites until stiff peaks formed, then gently folded them into the chocolate mixture. Finally, they whipped heavy cream and folded that in too, creating a dessert that was intensely chocolatey yet light and airy. The mousse was spooned into individual serving cups or parfait glasses and chilled for hours until set. The texture was smooth, creamy, almost fluffy, and the flavor was pure chocolate, dark, bittersweet, and rich. Some grandmothers added a splash of vanilla or coffee to deepen the flavor. Others topped each serving with whipped cream and chocolate shavings. Chocolate mousse appeared at anniversary dinners, birthday celebrations, and Sundays when company was coming. It felt fancy and French, a dessert that showed off culinary skill. By the 1990s, store-bought mousse cups replaced the homemade version. The double boilers were stored away, and homemade chocolate mousse disappeared, taking its airy, chocolate-rich soul with it. Sunday dinner tables in the South during the 1960s often featured ambrosia pudding. Pie, a no-bake dessert that combined the flavors of classic ambrosia salad, coconut, pineapple, oranges, marshmallows, with a creamy pudding filling and graham cracker crust. Grandmothers mixed vanilla pudding, either homemade or from a box with crushed pineapple, drained but not rinsed, mandarin orange segments, miniature marshmallows, and sweetened shredded coconut. Once the mixture thickened, they folded in whipped cream or Cool Whip, creating a light, fluffy filling. The mixture went into graham cracker crusts and chilled for hours until firm. The finished pie was topped with extra coconut, toasted until golden, and sometimes a maraschino cherry in the center. The flavor was tropical, sweet, and creamy, with bursts of fruit and chewy coconut in every bite. The pie tasted like sunshine and church socials, a dessert that appeared at Easter, Mother's Day, and summer potlucks. It was easy to make, transportable, and always popular. Children loved the marshmallows and bright orange fruit. Adults appreciated the nostalgia, remembering their own grandmother's ambrosia salads. By the 1990s, ambrosia fell out of favor, dismissed as old-fashioned and too sweet. The pie disappeared from tables, and the recipe was forgotten, taking its tropical, marshmallow-studded sweetness into silence. Late summer Sundays in the 1960s brought cherry peach dumplings, a fruit dessert that combined fresh peaches and cherries with tender biscuit-like dough. Grandmothers peeled and sliced ripe peaches, pitted fresh cherries, then tossed the fruit with sugar, cinnamon, and a squeeze of lemon juice. The fruit went into buttered baking dishes. For the dumplings, they made a simple biscuit dough, flour, baking powder, salt, sugar, butter, and milk, then dropped spoonfuls of dough on top of the fruit. The dishes went into 375-degree ovens and baked until the dumplings puffed and browned, and the fruit bubbled up around the edges. The smell of baking fruit and buttery dough filled the house. Families served the dumplings warm in bowls, spooning the tender biscuit, topping, and syrupy fruit together, then adding heavy cream or vanilla ice cream. The combination of sweet, juicy fruit and fluffy, slightly sweet dough was perfect. Some grandmothers made the dumplings on the stovetop, simmering the fruit in a skillet and dropping the dough on top, covering it with steam. Either way, the dessert celebrated the brief overlap of peach and cherry seasons. By the 1990s, the dessert disappeared. Fresh cherries and peaches were bought separately, never combined, and cherry peach dumplings were forgotten forever. 20 Sunday desserts vanished without ceremony. The recipes were never written down, the techniques were never taught, and the desserts stopped being made. By 2000, they existed only in fading memories of elderly grandchildren who could barely remember the taste or the names. Sunday afternoons in the 1960s sometimes featured pineapple upside-down pie, a creative variation on the classic pineapple upside-down cake that combined pie crust with the caramelized fruit topping everyone loved. Grandmothers started by making the caramel layer in cast-iron skillets or pie pans, melting butter with brown sugar until it bubbled and turned glossy. They arranged pineapple rings in the caramel, placing a maraschino cherry in the center of each ring, then filled the spaces between with crushed pineapple or chopped pineapple pieces. Some grandmothers added chopped pecans or walnuts to the caramel, for extra texture and flavor. Once the fruit was arranged, they prepared a simple yellow cake batter or used a mix, pouring it over the pineapple layer. The pie baked at 350 degrees for about 45 minutes until the cake was golden and a toothpick came out clean. After cooling for 10 minutes, grandmothers ran a knife around the edge, placed a serving plate on top, and flipped the entire pie over in one confident motion. When the pan was lifted away, the caramelized pineapple appeared on top, glistening with sticky brown sugar syrup, the cherries bright red against golden fruit. The dessert looked spectacular. Impressive enough for company, but simple enough for every Sunday. Families served it warm or at room temperature, sometimes with whipped cream or vanilla ice cream. The combination of buttery pie crust, tender cake, caramelized pineapple, and sweet syrup made every bite rich and satisfying. The cherries added a pop of color and a hint of almond flavor from the maraschino syrup. Children fought over slices with the most pineapple rings, while adults savored the caramelized edges, where the brown sugar had turned dark and almost burnt, creating deep, complex sweetness. The dessert appeared at potlucks, church dinners, and Sunday family gatherings throughout the 1960s and into the early 1970s. By the 1980s, pineapple upside-down desserts began to seem dated and overly sweet. The bright yellow cake and red cherries looked artificial and kitschy compared to the more sophisticated European-style desserts that became fashionable. The cast-iron skillets that had once been used for upside-down pies were repurposed for cornbread and fried chicken. Fresh pineapples became more available and replaced canned rings in recipes. The maraschino cherries, once a staple of American desserts, fell out of favor as taste shifted toward natural ingredients and less processed foods. Nesselrode pie was the crown jewel of 1960s Sunday dessert tables, a luxurious cream pie filled with chestnuts, rum, candied fruits, and whipped cream that seemed almost too fancy to be homemade. The dessert had a fascinating history. It was created in the 1940s by a New York restaurateur and became wildly popular through the 1960s before vanishing almost completely. Grandmothers who made Nesselrode pie were showing off their culinary skills, creating something that tasted like it came from an expensive restaurant. The filling started with chestnut puree, either homemade from fresh chestnuts or from imported cans, beaten smooth with sugar, egg yolks, and a generous splash of dark rum. Some recipes called for rum extract to keep the pie halal and family-friendly. The mixture was cooked gently over low heat until thickened like custard, then cooled completely. Once cold, grandmothers folded in whipped cream, chopped candied fruits, cherries, citron, pineapple, and sometimes chopped toasted almonds or pecans. The filling went into baked pie crusts, usually made with vanilla wafer crumbs or graham crackers, and chilled for hours until firm. The finished pie was topped with more whipped cream, often piped into decorative rosettes, and garnished with candied cherries or chocolate shavings. The flavor was complex and sophisticated, the earthy sweetness of chestnuts, the boozy warmth of rum, the bright sweetness of candied fruit, the richness of cream. Every bite was different, depending on whether you got a piece of cherry or a bit of almond. The texture was smooth and creamy, almost like ice cream but richer. Nesselrode pie appeared at Christmas dinners, New Year's celebrations, and special Sundays when company was coming. It was a conversation piece, a dessert that made guests ask for the recipe and compliment the hostess. Making Nesselrode pie was labor-intensive, finding chestnut puree, cooking the custard, whipping cream by hand, but the result was worth the effort. By the late 1970s, Nesselrode pie began to disappear. Chestnut puree became harder to find in grocery stores as demand dropped. Younger generations had never heard of the dessert and didn't understand its appeal. The complicated preparation seemed unnecessary when simpler pies were just as delicious. Food trends shifted toward lighter, less rich desserts, and the heavy, creamy Nesselrode pie felt old-fashioned. Floating Island was one of the most elegant desserts to appear on 1960s Sunday tables, a French creation that looked like something from a restaurant, but was made entirely at home with eggs, sugar, milk, and vanilla. The dessert consisted of two parts, a silky vanilla custard sauce called crème anglaise, and delicate poached meringue islets that floated on top. Grandmothers started by making the custard, whisking egg yolks with sugar until pale and thick, then slowly adding warm milk while stirring constantly. The mixture cooked gently over low heat, never boiling, until it thickened enough to coat the back of a spoon. Once strained and cooled, the custard became the sea in which the meringue islands would float. The meringues were made from egg whites whipped with sugar until glossy and stiff, then shaped into ovals using 2 spoons. Grandmothers poached the meringue shapes in barely simmering milk or water, turning them once, until they puffed up and set. The cooked meringues were lifted out with a slotted spoon and drained on towels. To serve, grandmothers ladled the cold custard sauce into shallow bowls or serving dishes, then placed the meringue islands on top. The islands floated on the pale yellow custard like clouds on a sunset sky. Some grandmothers drizzled caramel sauce over the top or sprinkled toasted almonds for decoration. The dessert was served immediately, and the contrast was stunning. Cool, creamy custard against light, airy meringue. The texture was remarkable: silky liquid custard, pillowy, soft meringue that dissolved on the tongue, with the sweetness perfectly balanced between the 2 components. Floating Island appeared at Easter dinners, Mother's Day brunches, and special Sunday meals when grandmothers wanted to serve something impressive. The dessert required skill and patience. The custard couldn't curdle. The meringues couldn't deflate. The poaching had to be gentle, but the result was spectacular. Children were mesmerized by the floating meringues and the way they melted in their mouths. Adults appreciated the delicate French elegance and the restraint of the simple flavors. By the 1980s, Floating Island began to disappear from home kitchens. The technique seemed too difficult and old-fashioned compared to simpler desserts. Younger cooks were intimidated by tempering eggs and poaching meringue. Food trends shifted toward richer, more indulgent desserts like molten chocolate cakes and tiramisu. The custard and meringue combination seemed too light, too subtle, too French. Baked custard was the simplest and most comforting Sunday dessert in the 1960s, made with ingredients every grandmother had on hand: eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, and a pinch of nutmeg. There was nothing fancy about baked custard. No layers or decorations or complicated techniques, just pure, honest sweetness baked until set. Grandmothers whisked whole eggs with sugar until smooth, then stirred in whole milk or a combination of milk and cream, vanilla extract, and a tiny bit of salt. The mixture was strained to remove any egg strands, then poured into individual custard cups or a large baking dish. Each cup got a light dusting of freshly grated nutmeg on top. The custard cups were placed in a larger pan filled with hot water, a water bath that ensured gentle, even cooking, and baked at 325 degrees for about 45 minutes, until the custards were set around the edges but still slightly jiggly in the center. After cooling, the custards were chilled in the refrigerator until cold and firm. The finished custard was smooth, creamy, and delicately sweet, with a warm spice of nutmeg on top. The texture was silky and tender, slipping easily from the spoon. Some families ate baked custard while it was still slightly warm, enjoying the contrast between the warm custard and cold cream poured over the top. Others preferred it completely chilled, served in the same cups it was baked in. Baked custard appeared on Sunday tables year-round, a dessert that was equally appropriate after pot roast in winter or fried chicken in summer. It was economical, using simple ingredients, and it was forgiving. As long as the water bath prevented overcooking, the custard always turned out smooth and perfect. Children loved the individual portions and the ritual of scraping the spoon around the edges of the cup to get every last bit. Adults appreciated the gentle sweetness and the way the dessert felt light and satisfying without being heavy. By the 1980s, baked custard began to seem too plain and old-fashioned. Dessert trends favored more dramatic presentations, towering layer cakes, elaborate trifles, rich chocolate creations. The simple custard cup couldn't compete visually with more impressive desserts. Convenience foods replaced homemade puddings, instant pudding mixes, store-bought custard cups, pre-made desserts from the bakery section. The custard cups themselves, once found in every kitchen, were packed away or discarded. By the 1990s, baked custard had disappeared from Sunday tables completely, taking its simple nutmeg-dusted sweetness into silence. An entire generation grew up never knowing the comfort of warm baked custard. never experiencing the silky texture and gentle flavor that their grandmothers had made every Sunday for decades. The Schaum Torte was the pride of Midwest Sunday tables in the 1960s, especially in Wisconsin and Minnesota, where German and Scandinavian immigrants had brought the recipe generations earlier. The name came from the German word Schaum, meaning foam, referring to the dessert's light, airy meringue base. Making Schaum's Torte was a labor of love that took hours, but resulted in a spectacular dessert that looked and tasted like something from a fancy bakery. Grandmothers started early Sunday morning, separating eggs while they were still cold, then letting the whites come to room temperature for maximum volume. They beat the egg whites until foamy, then gradually added sugar, a tablespoon at a time, beating constantly until the meringue became thick, glossy, and stiff enough to hold sharp peaks. Vanilla extract and a touch of vinegar or cream of tartar were added to stabilize the meringue and add flavor. Some grandmothers made one large torte, others made individual portions. The meringues baked at very low temperature, around 275 degrees for an hour or more, then were turned off and left in the cooling oven for several more hours to dry out completely. The result was meringue that was crispy and golden on the outside, slightly soft and marshmallow-like in the center. Just before serving, grandmothers filled the meringue nests with fresh strawberries or other berries, then topped everything with clouds of freshly whipped cream and sometimes vanilla ice cream. The contrast was spectacular: crispy, sweet meringue, juicy, tart berries, cold, creamy whipped cream. Every bite combined different textures and temperatures. Schaum Torte appeared at Easter, Mother's Day, graduations, and special Sundays throughout the summer when berries were in season. The dessert was impressive and beautiful, the kind of thing that made guests gasp when it was brought to the table. Making Schaum Torte required skill. The meringue had to be beaten perfectly, baked slowly, handled carefully. But grandmothers who mastered it were rightfully proud. By the 1980s, Schaum Torte began to disappear outside of Midwest communities. The long preparation time seemed impractical compared to quicker desserts. Younger cooks were intimidated by meringue and didn't want to spend hours on a single dessert. Food trends shifted toward denser, richer desserts, and the light, airy Schaum Torte seemed too delicate and old-fashioned. By the 1990s, the dessert had vanished from most Sunday tables, surviving only in a few traditional German-American communities. The technique of making perfect meringue nests was lost, and Schaum Torte became a forgotten treasure of Midwest baking history. 25 Sunday desserts disappeared into silence. Grandmothers died without passing down the recipes. Daughters never learned the techniques, and the desserts vanished. By 2000, only fading photographs and distant memories remained. The last 5 desserts followed, and the tradition ended completely. Pineapple fluff was a no-bake dessert that appeared on 1960s Sunday tables, especially during summer months when turning on the oven felt unbearable. The dessert was light, cold, creamy, and refreshing, perfect after a heavy Sunday dinner of roast beef or fried chicken. Grandmothers started with canned crushed pineapple, drained but not rinsed, saving some of the juice for later. They beat cream cheese with sugar until smooth and fluffy, then stirred in the drained pineapple, miniature marshmallows, and sometimes a handful of chopped pecans or walnuts. The mixture got folded into freshly whipped cream or Cool Whip, creating a light, airy texture that lived up to the fluff name. Some grandmothers added a splash of pineapple juice or lemon juice to brighten the flavor. The fluff was spooned into a serving bowl or individual dessert cups and chilled for at least 2 hours, sometimes overnight, allowing the marshmallows to soften and the flavors to meld together. The finished dessert was pale yellow, studded with bits of pineapple and marshmallow, and so light it almost floated off the spoon. The flavor was tropical and sweet, with the tang of pineapple cutting through the richness of cream cheese and whipped cream. The texture was creamy and fluffy, with occasional bursts of chewy marshmallow and crunchy nuts. Pineapple fluff appeared at potlucks, church dinners, picnics, and Sunday lunches throughout the 1960s and into the 1970s. It was easy to transport, didn't require refrigeration until serving time, and could be made a day ahead. Children loved the marshmallows and the bright pineapple flavor. Adults appreciated how light and refreshing it felt, especially compared to heavier pies and cakes. The dessert had variations. Some grandmothers added mandarin oranges or maraschino cherries. Others mixed in shredded coconut or used lemon jello dissolved in hot pineapple juice as a base. Every family had their own version, and debates about the right way to make pineapple fluff were common at church socials. By the 1980s, pineapple fluff began to seem dated and too sweet. The combination of canned fruit, marshmallows, and Cool Whip felt artificial compared to more natural, fresh desserts that became fashionable. Food trends shifted toward lighter, less sweet options, and pineapple fluff's retro appeal faded. By the 1990s, the dessert had disappeared from Sunday tables, replaced by fruit salads with fresh ingredients and yogurt-based dressings. The cans of crushed pineapple sat unused in pantries. The miniature marshmallows went stale, and pineapple fluff was forgotten, taking its fluffy tropical sweetness into silence. An entire generation grew up never tasting this simple, refreshing dessert that had once been a Sunday staple in homes across America. Glorified rice was a Midwest church supper staple in the 1960s, a dessert that transformed leftover white rice into something special with the addition of pineapple, whipped cream, marshmallows, and maraschino cherries. The name perfectly captured the dessert's essence. Ordinary rice elevated, glorified, turned into a sweet, creamy treat. Grandmothers started with cooked white rice, usually leftovers from Sunday dinner, cooled completely and fluffed with a fork. They stirred in crushed pineapple, drained but not rinsed, miniature marshmallows, and chopped maraschino cherries. Some added a splash of pineapple juice or a sprinkle of sugar if the mixture wasn't sweet enough. The rice mixture was folded into freshly whipped cream or Cool Whip, creating a dessert that was creamy, fluffy, and studded with rice grains that added a pleasant, chewy texture. A pinch of vanilla extract or almond extract sometimes went in for extra flavor. The glorified rice was spooned into serving bowls and chilled for several hours, allowing the marshmallows to soften and the flavors to blend together. The finished dessert looked festive with flecks of white rice, yellow pineapple, and red cherries suspended in fluffy whipped cream. The texture was unique, creamy and light from the whipped cream, chewy from the rice grains, soft from the marshmallows, juicy from the pineapple. The flavor was sweet and tropical, with the rice adding substance without overwhelming the other ingredients. Glorified rice appeared at church potlucks, ladies' luncheons, bridal showers, and Sunday dinners throughout Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, and other Midwest states. It was economical, using leftover rice and canned ingredients, and it could feed a crowd. The dessert traveled well and didn't require last-minute preparation, making it ideal for potlucks. Debates about the correct recipe were common. Some families insisted on freshly whipped cream. Others used Cool Whip exclusively. Some added chopped nuts or coconut. Others kept it simple. The dessert had Scandinavian roots, brought to America by Norwegian and Swedish immigrants who created similar rice pudding desserts. Glorified rice was the American adaptation, sweeter and lighter than traditional rice pudding. By the 1980s, glorified rice began to disappear outside of traditional Midwest communities. The dessert seemed too old-fashioned and too sweet for changing tastes. Younger generations didn't understand the appeal of rice in dessert and didn't want to serve leftovers to guests. Food trends moved toward fresh, natural ingredients, and the canned pineapple and marshmallows felt artificial. By the 1990s, glorified rice had vanished from most Sunday tables, surviving only in small pockets of the upper Midwest where church ladies kept the tradition alive. The recipe was forgotten by most Americans, and an entire dessert category, creamy rice desserts, disappeared from the national culinary consciousness. Date torte was a special occasion dessert in 1960s homes, a simple but spectacular creation made from dates, nuts, eggs, and very little flour. The dessert was popular in communities with Middle Eastern or Scandinavian heritage, where dates were appreciated and date palms symbolized hospitality and abundance. Grandmothers made date torte for Easter, Christmas, anniversaries, and special Sundays when they wanted to impress guests. The recipe was unusual. Instead of a typical cake batter, it consisted mostly of chopped dates and walnuts or pecans, bound together with beaten eggs, a small amount of flour, baking powder, and sugar. Some versions added vanilla extract or almond extract for extra flavor. The mixture was thick, almost like a sticky dough, and was spread into greased and floured square pans or pie pans. As it baked at 350 degrees, the dates caramelized, the nuts toasted, and the eggs created a tender, slightly chewy texture. The finished torte was dark brown, dense, and intensely sweet, with chunks of dates and nuts throughout. It was served cut into small squares or wedges because a little went a long way. Most grandmothers topped each serving with a generous dollop of whipped cream, which balanced the sweetness and added a creamy contrast to the chewy torte. Some served it with vanilla ice cream instead. The flavor was rich and caramel-like, with the natural sweetness of dates enhanced by baking. The texture was somewhere between a brownie and a fruitcake, chewy and moist with bits of crunchy nuts. Date torte appeared at holiday tables, church dinners, and Sunday desserts when fresh fruit wasn't available, or when grandmothers wanted something different from the usual pies and cakes. The dessert kept well, actually improving after a day or two as the flavors melded together. Some grandmothers made it ahead and stored it in tins, slicing pieces as needed. Date torte had practical advantages beyond its delicious flavor. The recipe used ingredients that stored well in the pantry: dates, nuts, flour, sugar, making it ideal for unexpected guests or last-minute entertaining. The dates provided natural sweetness and moisture, meaning the torte stayed fresh for days without drying out. Some grandmothers chopped the dates by hand. Others used kitchen shears dipped in hot water to prevent sticking. The nuts were always toasted first to intensify their flavor. Variations existed across different communities. Some added a touch of cinnamon or nutmeg. Others included orange zest or a splash of brandy for depth. By the 1980s, date torte began to disappear as dates fell out of favor in American cooking. Younger generations associated dates with fruitcake and old-fashioned desserts they didn't like. The dense, sweet torte seemed too heavy compared to lighter, more modern desserts. Grocery stores stopped carrying dates regularly, making the dessert harder to prepare. The blocks of pitted dates that had once been a pantry staple disappeared from supermarket shelves. Sunday afternoons in the 1960s sometimes featured cream puffs, delicate pastries made from choux dough and filled with vanilla custard or sweetened whipped cream. Making cream puffs required skill and confidence, so grandmothers who served them were showing off their baking abilities. The process started with choux pastry, made by bringing water and butter to a boil, then stirring in flour all at once and beating vigorously until the mixture formed a smooth ball that pulled away from the sides of the pan. Off the heat, grandmothers beat in eggs one at a time, creating a glossy, pipeable dough. The dough was dropped onto baking sheets in mounds or piped into rounds, then baked at high temperature, around 400 degrees, until the puffs ballooned into hollow, golden shells. The key was not opening the oven door too early, or the puffs would collapse. The steam created inside the dough expanded during baking, creating the hollow centers that would later hold the filling. Once cooled, the puffs were sliced open horizontally and filled with homemade vanilla custard, egg yolks, milk, sugar, cornstarch, and vanilla cooked until thick and creamy, or with sweetened whipped cream flavored with vanilla or almond extract. The tops were dusted with powdered sugar or drizzled with chocolate ganache made from melted chocolate and cream. The result was spectacular, crispy, buttery shells filled with rich, creamy filling that contrasted perfectly with the crunchy pastry. Each bite combined the crunch of the golden exterior with the smoothness of custard or the lightness of whipped cream. Cream puffs appeared at special Sunday dinners, anniversary celebrations, bridal showers, and tea parties throughout the 1960s. They looked elegant and tasted luxurious, like something from a French bakery. Children loved biting into the hollow shells and discovering the creamy filling inside. Adults appreciated the delicate texture and the way the puffs seemed light and rich at the same time. Some grandmothers made cream puff variations that expanded the basic recipe into other desserts. Profiteroles were small cream puffs filled with vanilla ice cream and topped with warm chocolate sauce. Served immediately, so the contrast between hot and cold created a dramatic effect. Eclairs were made from the same choux dough, but piped into long, finger-shaped logs, baked until golden, split, filled with vanilla custard, and topped with chocolate glaze. The same dough could become savory appetizers when filled with chicken salad or cheese. Grandmothers who mastered choux pastry could create an entire menu from one versatile dough. The technique was shared at church baking classes and passed down through handwritten recipe cards that emphasized the importance of beating the dough thoroughly and not opening the oven too soon. Banoffee pie arrived on American Sunday tables in the late 1960s, brought from England where it had been invented just a few years earlier at a restaurant called the Hungry Monk in East Sussex. The name combined banana and toffee, the two main flavors in this spectacular no-bake dessert that would become a brief sensation before disappearing from most American kitchens. Grandmothers who discovered the recipe in British magazines or heard about it from friends who had traveled to England were eager to try it, and once they did, it became a regular Sunday favorite for a brief but glorious period. The pie started with a graham cracker, or digestive biscuit crust. Graham crackers crushed fine and mixed with melted butter and sugar, then pressed firmly into pie pans and chilled until firm. Filling had 2 layers, each one crucial to the pie's success. First came the toffee layer, made by simmering unopened cans of sweetened condensed milk in water for 2 to 3 hours until the milk transformed into thick, dark caramel-flavored dulce de leche. This technique required patience and attention. The cans had to stay completely submerged in boiling water or they could explode, a danger that made the process slightly risky but exciting. Once the condensed milk had transformed into toffee, grandmothers let the cans cool completely before opening them and spreading the thick, sticky, golden brown toffee over the prepared crust. The toffee layer was spread evenly and chilled until firm. On top of the toffee, grandmothers arranged sliced fresh bananas in overlapping circles or layers, making sure every slice was coated to prevent browning. Some brushed the bananas with lemon juice to keep them from oxidizing. Then came the final layer, freshly whipped cream, beaten with sugar and vanilla until thick and billowy, spread or piped over the bananas in generous swirls and peaks. The finished pie was topped with chocolate shavings made by running a vegetable peeler along the edge of a chocolate bar, or dusted with cocoa powder, or drizzled with extra toffee sauce. The combination of flavors and textures was incredible. Crunchy graham cracker crust providing structure and a slight saltiness, thick and sticky toffee that was intensely caramel-flavored and almost fudge-like, sweet and creamy fresh bananas adding brightness and preventing the pie from being too heavy, and cold, fluffy whipped cream lightening everything and adding a cloud-like texture. The bitter chocolate on top balanced the sweetness and added visual appeal. Every bite was rich, sweet, complex, and satisfying. The toffee layer was the star, deeply caramelized, with notes of burnt sugar and condensed milk that tasted both familiar and exotic. The bananas added freshness and a natural sweetness that complemented the cooked toffee. The whipped cream kept the pie from being cloying and added a lightness that made it possible to eat a full slice without feeling overwhelmed. Banoffee pie appeared at Sunday dinners, birthday celebrations, and potlucks throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s, always generating excitement and requests for the recipe. The pie was easy to make ahead, requiring no baking, just patience, while the condensed milk transformed into toffee and time for the layers to chill and set. 30 Sunday desserts vanished within a single generation. Each one was baked by grandmothers who learned from their mothers, written on stained index cards tucked inside wooden recipe boxes, or never written down at all, just remembered through watching, tasting, and years of Sunday repetition. These weren't birthday cakes or holiday showpieces. They were weekly traditions. Desserts made every Sunday after church, served on glass plates at dining tables where 3 generations gathered. Apple Brown Betty, Floating Island, cream puffs, glorified rice. Each one represented family identity, regional pride, and culinary skill passed down through decades. Then the chain broke. Daughters stopped watching. Mothers stopped teaching. Grandmothers passed away in the 1980s and 1990s, taking measurements and techniques that existed only in memory. Recipe cards were tossed during estate sales, the handwriting faded and unreadable. Crystal dessert bowls were donated to Goodwill for $2. Meringue molds, custard cups, and pie pans were sold at yard sales and never replaced. By 2000, these 30 Sunday desserts had disappeared completely. No photographs documented them. No videos preserved the techniques. The recipes existed only in the fading memories of grandchildren who could barely remember the names or the tastes. If your grandmother made sham tort from scratch, you tasted something that will never exist again. If you remember eating pretzel gelatin dessert at church potlucks, you witnessed a tradition that died in silence. Comment below which Sunday dessert your grandmother made best, and share this with anyone who grew up in the 1960s before these recipes disappeared, completely from living memory.